There's a level of discipline that doesn't motivate anyone around you. It's unsettling. People don't applaud when you achieve it. They fall silent. They observe. Some laugh nervously. Others say you're overdoing it. Because when someone becomes too consistent, it forces everyone around them to confront their own inconsistency. And that hurts. Before continuing, subscribe to the channel. The content you are about to hear is not for the merely curious. It's for those who are ready to change their own identity. You've probably seen this type of person before. They always wake up at the same time. It doesn't matter if it's raining, if they're tired, or if the day promises to be difficult. They do the same things, in the same order, without drama, without speeches, and without needing external encouragement. While others start out enthusiastic and disappear by the third week, this person continues. While everyone else explains why they didn't get through today, they show up. And at some point, the phrase emerges that no one says with admiration but with bewilderment. That's not normal. And they're right. It's not normal. Normal is giving up. Normal is negotiating with yourself. Normal is needing motivation. What you're about to hear isn't about willpower. It's not about discipline as effort. It's about an old, silent, and relentless system created long before productivity books or habit tracking apps. A system that doesn't improve you. It replaces you. The story begins with Daniel, a software engineer who seemed to have everything under control, except his own life. He was intelligent, articulate, and well paid. The kind of person everyone believed to be naturally disciplined. But behind the facade, Daniel lived in short cycles of trial and failure. Every new phase came with internal promises. This time it will work. This time it's different. He established routines, bought equipment, organized his schedule. 2 weeks later, everything died silently. The problem wasn't a lack of knowledge. He knew exactly what he needed to do. The problem was something deeper, something structural, something he couldn't name. Every morning, the same scene repeated itself. The alarm clock rang. An internal dialogue began. I'm tired today. I'll make up for it tomorrow. One day won't make a difference. It always seemed reasonable. It always seemed logical. And it always ended in the same place. Daniel believed the problem was a lack of discipline. Until he discovered that discipline isn't what fails first. What fails first is identity. Because the human brain doesn't execute commitments it considers reversible. Anything that can be broken becomes a negotiation. And every negotiation is an open door to giving up. The change began when Daniel stumbled upon an ancient concept from Japanese Zen Buddhism. It wasn't a motivational method. It didn't promise quick results. It didn't talk about balance. It spoke of absolute continuity. A practice so simple that it seemed irrelevant at first glance, but it sustained entire monasteries for centuries without interruption. The idea was brutal. Allow no gaps, ever. No matter the context, no matter the condition. The practice continues. In monasteries, monks don't wake up motivated. They wake up because the bell rings, always at the same time, for hundreds of years. There is no question of should I go or not. That question simply doesn't exist, because it's not a decision. It's an identity in action. That's when Daniel realized something that changed everything. He didn't need to try to be disciplined. He needed to become someone for whom there was no alternative. Instead of private promises, he made a public declaration, not as marketing, as a trap. He wrote on a simple piece of paper what he would do, when he would do it, and for how long. He signed it. He shared it. He told close friends and family. He created witnesses. The reactions came quickly. They said he was exaggerating, that he was being radical, that it wasn't healthy, perfect. The discomfort of others was exactly the point. Giving up now had a greater social cost than continuing. And for the first time, Daniel's brain was no longer negotiating whether to do it or not. He just needed to deal with the fact that there was no clean way out. Even so, the mornings were difficult. His body resisted. His mind screamed. But something had changed. There was no more deciding, only executing. He chose a fixed schedule, not out of Love for the early hours, but because it was the only time when the world didn't interfere. Eliminating distractions was more important than optimizing performance. The goal wasn't to do better. It was to not stop. In the second week, something strange happened. He started waking up before the alarm. In the third, he got up without thinking. In the fourth, the movement happened before consciousness. The brain had stopped arguing. When the schedule ceases to be variable, the mind loses space to negotiate. But there was another problem. Daniel was still changing what he did within that time frame. One day he meditated, the next he read, then he trained. The brain found a new loophole. The negotiation returned, disguised as variety. That's when he understood the system's final trick. Absolute repetition, same action, same order, same duration, every day. No creativity, no adaptation, no listening to the body. The practice didn't need to be interesting. It needed to be inevitable. The third week was a battle. His mind begged for change. It said it was mechanical, robotic, unsustainable. Exactly. Sustainable isn't what stimulates. Sustainable is what doesn't require choice. By the sixth week, Daniel was performing the sequence without realizing he had begun. His body had learned. His identity had changed. Illness, travel, exhaustion. Nothing became an excuse. When he couldn't do everything, he did the minimum. Never zero. Never a gap. Practice might shrink, but it couldn't disappear. Because the moment you create a gap is the moment you stop being someone who practices and go back to being someone who tries. People started to notice. Comments started to surface. Some said he was obsessed, others that it didn't seem healthy. Daniel knew he was on the right track, because when his discipline bothers people, it finally works. The change didn't happen cleanly. There wasn't a magical morning when Daniel woke up transformed. What there was resistance, a lot of it. Because when the mind loses the right to negotiate, it doesn't accept it silently. It attacks. It attacks with arguments that sound rational, with concerns that seem mature, with warnings disguised as care. The body doesn't care about identity, reputation, or consistency. It wants comfort. It wants to preserve energy. It wants to avoid immediate discomfort. And every morning, without exception, it reminded Daniel of that. In the first few days, the discomfort seemed purely physical. Accumulated. Sleep deprivation, stiffness in his body, constant irritation. Then it became psychological. His mind began to suggest clever exceptions. You've already proven you can do it. A break now prevents burnout. This doesn't need to be so rigid. The rigidity, however, was the remedy itself. Because every time Daniel gave in to an exception, something old resurfaced. A familiar pattern. A short relief, followed by weeks of regression. He had lived through this too many times to pretend he didn't recognize it. It was during this period that he realized the most common mistake people make when trying to be consistent. People believe the problem lies in intensity, when in reality it lies in variability. Every time you decide again when to do something, the brain understands that it is still optional. And everything that is optional will be negotiated. Daniel didn't need more force. He needed to remove decisions. That's why the schedule wasn't just early. It was fixed, untouchable. It didn't matter if he had slept badly or if the previous day had been difficult. The clock didn't know that. The clock didn't negotiate. But even with a fixed schedule, something still slipped through. There were days when he sat down for practice and spent minutes choosing what he would do. Read or meditate. Work out or stretch, more time or less time. And each choice drained energy. Each micro-decision opened a crack through which the old identity tried to enter. That's when he understood that it wasn't enough to eliminate the when. He needed to eliminate the what. The sequence became immutable. The same order, the same duration, the same rhythm, not because it was the best possible combination, but because it was a combination that didn't need to be thought about. The repetition began to bother him. Friends said he was becoming predictable. He took this as a compliment. Because predictability, in that context, meant reliability. And reliability is the opposite of negotiation. In the third week, the conflict peaked. The mind began to attack more aggressively. This is a waste of time. You could optimize. Intelligent people don't live like this. The curious thing is that these thoughts didn't come on the difficult days. They came when everything seemed to be working, when the body began to adapt, when the practice ceased to be an open battle and became a habit in formation. It is at this moment that the mind tries to regain control. Not because something is wrong, but because something is changing. Daniel almost gave up the day he got sick. Low fever, heavy body, a perfect excuse to stop. The thought came automatically. When I get better, I'll come back. He already knew this script. That's how everything died. So he did the bare minimum, not the ideal practice, continuous practice, 2 minutes, one gesture, a clear signal to the brain that the sequence hadn't been broken. The gap didn't form, and that made all the difference. Days later, the trip arrived. Early airport, long meetings, small hotel, disrupted routine. In the past, this would have been the end. This time, he had already decided beforehand. When the context changes, practice shrinks, but doesn't disappear. He did what he could, where he could. Nothing was perfect. Everything was continuous. His identity remained intact. That's when Daniel realized something even deeper. Discipline wasn't just shaping his habits, it was reorganizing his nervous system. Anxiety decreased, not because life became easier, but because decisions became fewer. His brain knew what was coming next. It didn't need to anticipate, calculate, or justify. Certainty replaced tension, and that certainty began to spread to other areas of his life. People started to react. Indirect comments arose. Don't you ever get tired? Isn't that an exaggeration? You need to learn to relax. Daniel didn't argue. He knew those phrases weren't about him. They were about the discomfort of watching someone do what everyone says they want to do, but few are willing to sustain. When someone maintains consistency long enough, it exposes the excuses of others without saying a word. In the 6th week, something silent happened. He realized he had finished the practice without remembering starting it. There was no internal debate. There was no mental preparation. The body simply moved. The sequence was ingrained, not as effort, but as a pattern. It was the beginning of automation, the point where discipline ceases to be a conscious act and begins to operate below the surface. But the real test was yet to come, because the more solid the pattern becomes, the more unpredictable the obstacles become. And Daniel hadn't yet faced the kind of chaos that destroys even the best planned routines. That would come later. And it would require something even more radical than repetition. It would require anticipation. The breaking point didn't come on a bad day. It came on a chaotic day. One of those days that no one can predict, much less control. The kind of day that dismantles schedules, breaks plans, and tests the difference between those who depend on conditions and those who depend on identity. Daniel woke up to a call before his usual time. An urgent family problem. Rush, traffic, piled up commitments. His body still tired, his mind already pressured. The perfect scenario for the old phrase to appear. Not today. She showed up, but she couldn't find a place. Not because Daniel was, especially strong that day, but because the decision no longer existed. The answer was ready before the question even arose. He didn't think about how he would do it. He simply did what was predetermined for situations like this. The bare minimum. No drama, no creative adaptation, no justification. The gesture was small, almost insignificant, but it carried something enormous. The sequence remained intact. It was at that moment that he understood the last layer of the system. It's not enough to repeat. You need to pre-decide. Every time you wait for an obstacle to appear before deciding what to do, you lose. Because decisions made under pressure almost always follow the path of least resistance. The brain doesn't seek coherence when it's stressed. It seeks relief. Zen monasteries have known this for centuries. That's why they don't decide when something goes wrong. The answer already exists. The bell rings. The practice continues. The location changes, the form changes, but the fact remains. Daniel began mentally listing everything that had broken his consistency in the past. Extreme fatigue, travel, illness, lack of space, lack of time. For each scenario, a fixed response, not the ideal response, the possible response. When X happens, Y will be done, without thinking, without evaluating, without negotiating. This removed the chaos's power to interrupt the practice. And when chaos loses power, something profound changes in the nervous system. Anxiety decreases because the future ceases to be uncertain. No matter what happens tomorrow, the practice will continue. Around day 70, Daniel realized something he had never experienced before. He no longer needed to convince himself. He didn't need to remember. He didn't need to push himself. His body moved on its own. The sequence unfolded like an ancient ritual, and the less conscious attention it required, the more solid it became. Discipline had crossed the invisible boundary between effort and automatism. It was no longer something he did. It was something that happened through him. People around him began to react differently, not with curiosity, but with discomfort. Colleagues commented that he seemed too intense. Friends said he needed to relax a little. Someone suggested that it didn't seem healthy. Daniel didn't defend himself. He knew that those kinds of comments arise when someone ceases to be comparable. When you're still trying, people feel comfortable. When you stop trying and become consistent, you become an unwanted mirror. The curious thing is that Daniel didn't feel rigid inside. He felt free. Free from the exhaustion of deciding. Free from the guilt of failing. Free from the emotional roller coaster of trying. Practice no longer occupied mental space. It freed up space. Because what's exhausting isn't doing. It's deciding to do. When that disappears, you have energy left for the rest of your life. On the 90th day, there was no celebration, no epic feeling, no sense of victory, just continuity. And that was the definitive sign that something had changed. He hadn't completed a challenge. He had ended an old version of himself, the version that negotiated, the version that needed ideal conditions, the version that confused intention with identity. Someone said, almost without realizing it, that his consistency was frightening. Daniel smiled inwardly, not because he wanted to instill fear, but because he recognized the final marker of the process. When his discipline begins to bother people, it's because it no longer depends on motivation. It silently exposes the cost of the choices others don't make. The system didn't make him better. It made him different. He was no longer someone trying to be disciplined. He was someone for whom there is no other way to operate, and that's what nobody tells you about real discipline. It doesn't add something to your life. It removes something. It removes something. It removes the negotiation. It removes the doubt. It removes the need to prove. In its place, it leaves an identity that simply continues. The question isn't whether you can do it. It's whether you're willing to let go of the version of yourself that needs to choose every day. Because that level of consistency doesn't come from continuous effort. It comes from the decision to never have to choose again. And when that happens, people will look at you and think it's not normal. And they'll be right. Normal is to stop. You chose to stay. Most people never get here. Not because they lack potential, but because they never stay long enough to become someone different. They try, they fail, they explain, they start over. And they call that life. You now know there is another way. A silent way. Without applause, without external validation, where discipline ceases to be effort and becomes nature. When you eliminate negotiation, something profound happens. The noise disappears. Anxiety diminishes. Identity reorganizes itself. You no longer wake up wondering if you're going to do it. You simply do it. And it's precisely at this point that your presence begins to bother people. Not because you're aggressive, but because your consistency exposes what others avoid facing. The cost of stopping, the cost of always putting it off, the cost of never becoming. People will say you're exaggerating, that it's unhealthy, that you need balance. They're not talking about you. They're talking about the discomfort of seeing someone uphold what they've always treated as their intention. Normalcy never produced anything extraordinary. Normalcy is giving up with elegant justifications. You chose something different. True discipline doesn't improve habits. It shuts down old versions of who you were. It doesn't add another routine to your life. It removes the need to choose. And when that happens, the transformation doesn't seem grand. It seems inevitable, like a river that doesn't decide to flow. It just keeps going. If this message resonated with you, don't let it die here. Subscribe to the channel. Not as a symbolic gesture, but as a silent declaration of continuity. Keep practicing. Keep showing up. Keep going when no one is watching. Because in the end, it's not about motivation, nor about strength. It's about becoming someone for whom stopping simply isn't an option. Stay until next time.